Hey, everybody. So we want to thank everybody for watching. A couple weeks ago, you submitted questions about how we can navigate some of the mental health struggles that lots of us have been having during 11, almost 12 months of COVID. So I want to thank Dr. Hack for joining us, and he's going to give us some insight and some wisdom about how we can better navigate our mental health. So I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Hack.
All right. Thank you, JT. Hey, everybody. I'm Dr. Bradley Hack, and I am a licensed psychologist and a sports psychologist. So I do all the things that a regular psychologist does. So I talk with folks about things that are getting in their way in life. Sometimes it's pretty significant things like feeling depressed or feeling really anxious or stressed out. Other times it's less serious and more about relationship issues or family issues or academic stress. And then I also work a lot with athletes, a lot with teenage athletes, as well as collegiate athletes and pro athletes. So I work at Carolina. I've been there for 25 years as a senior sports psychologist, working with the teams and the athletes there. And then I work with the Hurricanes and the NCFC Pro soccer team in town. And then I have a private practice office in Cary where I see a lot of teenagers and we talk about sports and life and all kinds of other good stuff. So hopefully I can answer some of the questions that you guys have submitted to JT. And I'm also going to try to give you a little bit of background on why I'm answering the way that I'm answering. And I prepared some slides for y'all, so you'll have something to refer back to and that you can take away and remember if anything like this comes up down the road. So hopefully this will be informative for you and helpful.
Thanks, Dr. Hack. Sorry, I'm trying to navigate all my windows here. I really appreciate your expertise with students. I think that's something that is going to be really helpful to us today. Okay, so the first question that was submitted by a student is, how do I stay mentally healthy on a busy day with school or with work, or school and work if I'm busy?
Yep, absolutely. Good question. And it's hard sometimes, right? Because our days get really stressful and you can have lots of assignments due. You might have a practice or rehearsal you have to get to. You might have family commitments, and it's really easy to get overwhelmed and feel rushed and kind of scattered. At the same time, you might feel a lot of pressure to get things done and get it done well if you're someone who likes to do things well. So the first thing I'd say is it's a really good question, and it's something that all of us deal with on a daily basis. Sometimes it's a little bit worse with situation with COVID because there's lots of different kinds of feelings and situations going on. But in general, what I wanted to do was address what being mentally healthy is to start. And so if you could pull up that spectrum, JT, so I can teach you guys real quick what the difference is between being mentally fit, mentally healthy, having mental distress, and then having a mental disorder. So you can see on the screen that there's the spectrum, and we work with people who are on the entirety of the spectrum. So we work with a lot of people that are mentally quite fit and healthy, and they just want to get better at it. So let me start at that end. So that being mentally fit is a little bit different than being mentally healthy. So let me use physical health and physical fitness as an example. So physical health basically means that you don't have any diseases. You don't have heart disease, you don't have asthma, and it doesn't necessarily mean that you're fit. It just means that you don't have any kind of significant disorder that you're dealing with. But to be physically fit, you have to go beyond that. And you have to train in order to be fit so that your body can adapt to whatever it encounters on a daily basis. So that might mean going for a run or lifting weights in order to be stronger. So not only are you healthy, but now your body is able to adapt to whatever might come up. And that's why we train for sports. It's the whole reason that we do all of those things, is so we can handle the sport better, right? And so in order to stay physically fit, you've got to practice it. You've got to go train. And it's uncomfortable and it's hard. And sometimes you're not motivated to do it, but man, does it pay off, because you feel really good. You're challenging yourself all the time. And now your body is ready to face whatever it might encounter. Okay. So physical fitness is going beyond being physically healthy. And really, it's the same thing with mental fitness. We just don't talk that much about it. We just kind of expect that we should be. But I always say, why should you be? Like, where did you learn this? They didn't teach it to you in preschool or elementary school. Your parents may not know what it is. And my guess is your coaches and teachers don't know either. So that's part of what I wanted to get across to you guys today, is the idea of mental fitness and the fact that I'm going to try to teach you how to be that way so that whatever pops up during your day, you know how to handle it. Okay. So, what we want to do is we want to practice mental fitness just like we practice physical fitness. And I'll go through a few things here in just a minute on the next slide, but let me finish with the continuum first. Being mentally healthy means that, everything's pretty much going fine. You might have periodic ups and downs. Someone doesn't call you back and it kind of hurts your feelings. You get a grade on a test that you were hoping for would be better, so you feel disappointed. That's all very normal. You're still healthy, but you just have things that come up. If you're mentally fit, what I would say is those things don't bother you quite as much. You're kind of able to recognize it and acknowledge it and then kind of roll with it and really not let it bother you, get back down to business, whatever you're doing. We cross over from being mentally healthy, though, into mental distress. And this is where you start to get some kind of impairment. And what that means is the amount of mental stuff that you're dealing with is getting in the way with school. Maybe you can't focus as much. Maybe you're not as motivated. It might be getting in the way of your relationships. So you're crankier with your friends or your parents. You're just not quite yourself because you're preoccupied. You're upset and you don't know what to do to deal with it. So it just starts to cause problems in your life. And then when you get down to disorder, that's when there's a really significant impairment. So you're missing school more often than not, maybe, or a significant amount. You're starting to maybe lose friends because they're fed up with you. Your mom and dad start to give you consequences or punish you because they're fed up. And so what we want to do is we want to try to head this off long before it gets to distress or disorder. That's part of why we're talking about this today. If you feel like you're there, either at the distress level or the disorder level, that's when you got to go to an adult and say, hey, look, I'm struggling. And go to your mom or dad, go to your teachers, your coaches, someone like JT, folks at the church, and say, hey, man, something's going on. I think I need to kind of sort through it with somebody. And so it might be a trusted adult. It could be a professional. In any of those cases, we want to make sure that you're tending to that. Okay, so that's the spectrum of mental fitness and mental health. Okay, why don't we go to the next slide? Okay, so I tried to put this down in ways that you guys could remember. So I have sort of these takeaway phrases, 1 through 5, and then I kind of explain what they are. So going back to the question of being mentally healthy during a busy day, what I would say is more often than not, when we are getting stressed out during a busy day, it's because we're thinking about the future a lot. Mm-hmm. Meaning, will I get this done? What kind of a grade will I get on this assignment? How will I play in the game? How will my performance go? How am I going to handle this problem that I'm having it with my friends? And so what happens is our mind drifts to the future. And whenever that occurs, we get tense, we get tight. We actually get a physical response where we kind of like, ugh, we kind of bunch our muscles up and start to get in fight or flight mode. And when we do that, it's very difficult to be motivated and it's very difficult to focus. So the very first thing that I would say is if you notice that you're feeling kind of scattered or like you're not really in a healthy place on a busy day, call a timeout, recognize that you're where your mind is, which is probably in the future, and then just try to guide it back to the present moment and pay attention and full and undivided attention to whatever you're doing in that moment. If you happen to be playing a sport, for example, it's a little bit easier because that's very demanding and you have to pay attention with all your senses. If you're doing school, it's a little bit more difficult because it's a little bit less about your senses and more about what you're thinking. But I still want you to try to bring your mind back to what it is that you're doing. And then if those thoughts keep coming in, which is pretty normal, that's okay, just recognize the thought and then let it drift to the side. I don't want you to try to fight it or shut it out because it will backfire. And then you'll start thinking about those things more. And I'll give you a quick example about that. I'm going to say a phrase. I'm going to give you an object. Okay. And I'm going to say it out loud here in a second. And under no circumstances do I want you guys to allow yourself to let that object enter your mind. So in other words, don't think the object that I'm about to say. Okay, here we go. A yellow Jeep. Now my guess is the picture of a yellow Jeep just popped into your head.
Guilty.
Exactly. And it's almost unavoidable because our mind wants to make sense of everything that we see and hear. And so we start thinking a lot. And that's great for much of the day, but some of the day we have to make sure we let our thoughts drift to the side. And so when you try to fight what it is that you're thinking, it backfires, just like with the yellow Jeep. So instead, what we want to do is we want to recognize, hey, I'm having a thought. It's not super helpful. Let me just acknowledge that it's there. I'm going to take a deep breath, and on my exhale, I'm just going to let it drift to the side. And if it needs my attention later, I'll pay attention to it. I'll look at it. I'll think about it for a few seconds, and then I'm going to bring my mind back to what I'm doing. And this is the essence of how we teach athletes to be mentally tough, because they have to be able to pay attention amidst a very crazy, distracting environment. And this is part of what we teach them. And you can use this on your own at home, whether you're talking to a friend, whether you're at a practice, or whether you're just sitting there studying. Okay, so make sure that you try to give your full attention to what you're doing. When you do it, you're going to be calmer. Whatever you're doing, you're going to do it a whole lot better, and you're going to enjoy it. Now, you might think that I'm nuts because these days kids like to be distracted with all kinds of different screens, but you got to trust me, and the research backs me up. If you can just set that stuff to the side and give your full attention to what you're doing, it's going to feel better. So that's tip number one. Okay. The second thing to be mentally fit and mentally healthy is you have to know yourself. And some of you might be really good at this already, and others may not have ever given this a second thought. But what that means is you have to have strong self-awareness skills. So what does that mean? Well, it means you know what you're thinking, you know what you're feeling, and you know why you're doing what you're doing at any given moment. And this takes a little bit of practice to start to become aware and tune into what you're thinking about or what you're feeling. But it's really, really helpful because otherwise you can't fix it. It'd be like driving down the road in your car and it's making all kinds of noises and it's lurching and smoking and whatever, and you just keep driving because you don't know to pop the hood and see what's going on. So what we want you to do is start practicing slowing down and popping the hood and saying, hey, what's going on under here? That's the problem. So usually it'll be something that you're thinking or feeling or some way that you're acting that's causing the difficulty. And I'll go through an exercise here in a minute for how to start to put that into practice. But we want to make sure that you understand yourself. This is going to help you to fix any problems quicker. It's going to help you to communicate in your relationships with people because you know what you're thinking and feeling. And it's going to make everything go better. Okay. The third thing that you need to do is you need to be able to think flexibly. Now, it's not necessarily thinking positively, it's thinking flexibly. And what that means is taking different perspectives on any one issue. Now, some people like to think about things just one way. They're kind of all or nothing thinkers, or kind of black or white, right? It's either this or it's that. But what we know from all of the research in psychology is when you think that way, you tend to feel much more extremely. So your emotions get really skyrocketed when you think all or nothing. You know, either I get an A or I'm going to wind up living under a bridge on the street, right? So that's an example of all or nothing thinking. And my guess is there's many different kinds of scenarios that may play out other than living homeless under a bridge if you don't get an A. So you have to catch yourself the way that you're thinking about things and say, okay, wait a second, time out. I certainly could think about it that way, but I could think about it this way or this way or this way. And you have to practice being flexible. Now, they don't all necessarily need to be positive ways of thinking. They just need to be different, right? So, well, if I don't get an A, maybe I can make it up on the next quiz or the next homework assignment. Maybe I need to go to the teacher and ask for some help. You know, as long as I put my best foot forward and I learned the material and I tried my hardest, hey man, that's a win, that's a dub. So those are all different ways of seeing that situation of not getting the grade that you wanted. And that's what I want you to practice. That's part of mental fitness. Okay. When you do this, it's going to calm our emotions down. The fourth thing, and some of the guys that are watching are going to be like, bruh, I don't know. But again, I want you to trust me. You have to validate your own feelings. And that's part of a follow-up from number 2. You have to know what those feelings are. As guys in our culture, we are generally not taught to do this, especially if you're athletes or into other kinds of very manly or masculine things. But the problem is if we ignore the feelings, they fester like an untended wound, and then they start to infect the system. So we have to be aware of what those feelings are, and we got to give them just a little bit of space. I don't want you to wallow in your emotions. I don't want you to have to spout your emotions at the top of your lungs to everybody you know. That's not at all what I'm talking about. It's more of an internal experience of, hey, you know what? And when I walked down the hallway and so didn't say hi back to me and kind of sneered at me, it just kind of hurt, man. It's like,
Mm,
oof. And you need to just give yourself 5, 10 seconds to let that feeling be there and
mm,
acknowledge it, give it a little bit of space. And then what you do is you come back with, okay, now what am I going to do?
mhm,
Okay, so you're not wallowing in it, but you're also not repressing or ignoring it. This is incredibly important because our culture does not tune in to our emotions. We think it's going to make us weak. There's
mm,
nothing that could be further from the truth. Okay, it's quite the opposite.
mhm,
What it does is it makes you stronger because it hurts.
mm,
If you can allow yourself to feel something that hurts, that's what makes you tough. It's the whole idea of lifting weights or running or training physically. When you lift weights or you run, you're putting yourself into a sense of pain and discomfort. But we do it because it makes us stronger and healthier. It's the exact same thing with feelings. It's just mental and psychological. We're just not used to thinking that
I've never heard it explained that way. That's so great.
way. I'm so glad that it makes sense. I mean, most people get it, but we have so much learning that tells us not to think that way
Mhm,
that it kind of, we have to overcome that. But I use that metaphor of working out and running as a way to kind of say, oh, wait, yeah, we do that with our bodies. Why shouldn't we do it with our minds? Okay. You can only feel your feelings and open up to them if you have courage to do that in strength.
mm,
Okay. Now, your families, your communities, your friends may not get it or they may give you a hard time, but you can certainly do it internally. So nobody even needs to know that you're doing it if it's embarrassing to you or if it's not accepted in your community.
mm,
Okay, so we want to make sure that we can validate those feelings. And then the last thing that we want to do is we have to stretch our comfort zones every single day. So if you think of your comfort zone as a circle, right, everything inside of it is comfortable and everything outside of it is uncomfortable by definition. All right. If you stay in your comfort zone, what happens is it means that everything that you experience outside of that from now and moving forward in your life is going to be scary to you. And what I hear a lot from teenagers and adults for that matter is, well, I don't want to do that because it's uncomfortable. And my response is, great, let's go after it. Because if we're not trying to expand our comfort zone, it's going to slowly but surely shrink.
mm,
So less and less things are comfortable. And before you know it, you've really constrained yourself in the way that you can live life. And you end up being scared. And you guys know what I'm talking about. If you're being honest with yourself, when you avoid something, it's because you're afraid of it.
mm,
It's not because you don't want to do it, it's because it's hard, right? So, what I want you guys to do to be mentally fit is try to challenge yourself 1%, 2%, 3% each day in who you talk to, how you approach your schooling, getting better at practice or rehearsal if you're into the arts or music, and make sure that you're pushing your boundaries. Because if you do that a little bit every day, before you know it, your comfort zone is huge
mm,
and you're not really afraid of anything. And that's the essence of confidence because you're teaching yourself, hey, I can tolerate whatever is out there because I've done it, I've practiced it, and I've learned, hey, I can do this. Okay, let me pause for 1 second because I got to close my door because someone just came in my waiting room. Hang on 1 second,
no
JT.
problem.
Okay, so that is a very long answer to the very first question of how do you stay mentally healthy on a busy day? But hopefully it gives you some takeaways. All
Yeah.
right, so let's go to the next question.
So the next question was, and you touched on this a little bit. What are some ways to deal with being in a slump, like a lack of motivation, just generally feeling bad? Which I know, I was going to say, I guess, or I think, I'm like, no, I know, because I've heard enough of our students say that lack of motivation is a thing I hear all the time. I don't even want to call or like reach out to people that I'm close to. I don't want to do anything. It's the same thing every day. I don't get excited about anything.
Yep. Yeah, and I would say that, I mean, that's kind of, I think, what a lot of people are going through. So whether you guys know that or not, it's really what most of us are going through because life's pretty dang boring right now. Even for adults that have jobs, it's still like you can't really do a whole lot,
Mhm.
especially if you're trying to follow protocols and stay safe. So the first thing that I would say is understand that that's okay. There's
Mm,
going to be times in life where you struggle with motivation. You don't need to freak out about it, but what you need to do is pop the hood and say, what's going on? let's try to figure this out. The first thing I would say is we're under extremely unusual circumstances.
Mm,
So in my lifetime, which is significant, we've never gone through anything like this before. And I've never lived through a war, but I kind of imagine it might be a little bit like this in that everybody's restricted in what they can do.
mm,
Okay. So just understand that these are extraordinary circumstances, and being unmotivated, I don't think is an abnormal response at all. I think it's a very normal response. So don't beat yourself up or think it's an awful thing that you're losing your motivation. It's okay. But we want to try to fix it. Okay. So, how do you fix motivation? Well, when I'm working with athletes, this is another good example. The very first thing that we'll ask them is, well, what are your goals in the situation?
mm,
Let's go back to the fundamentals of motivation, which is goal setting. And so we'll go through and say, okay, what are you trying to achieve with your training? What are you trying to get to? What performance are you trying to have in this next game or this next practice? And start to get them talking a little bit more about their goals and what they want to achieve. Because in the day in and day out of training, it's easy to forget those.
mhm,
So just like in the day in and day out of school and practices and whatever else it is that you're doing, it's easy to lose sight of what it is you're trying to accomplish. So one strategy in that moment is to go back and say, okay, what am I trying to accomplish?
mm,
What's the point of all of this? Um, so that's a good solid foundation and fundamental to go back to. Um, the second thing that I would say is if that's not working, you can also say, okay, can I get myself motivated with an external reward of some sort? Right. So when we're kids, it's motivating to get a trophy for something or a ribbon for something or a gold star. Those are examples of external rewards. And what it does is kind of like, ooh, kind of brightens up your day. Like, ooh, that was
mhm,
kind of fun. I like getting that. I want to do that more. Right. So it's a form of positive reinforcement for what it is that you just did. And this is something that you can do for yourself. A lot of times teenagers don't think about this, um, but it's something you can do for yourself. I've done it before when I've had low motivation to look for jobs. I gave myself gold or silver stars based on how hard it was that whatever it was I was trying to do. It's very silly. It feels a little bit goofy, but man, it worked because it got me motivated again. Okay. So whatever works, I'm a fan of that. So think about those kinds of things. What are things that have motivated you in the past? Maybe talk to your parents about it and get creative. Sometimes that won't work though. And what we know from a lot of psychological research is the more powerful motivator is what's called an internal reward or an intrinsic motivator, which is you're doing it because it feels good or it's the right thing to do. And those are far more powerful and lasting than the external.
mm,
It doesn't mean you can't use the external, you can't go back to your goals, but you also want to think about internal motivation. So, why are you in school? Right? What's the internal motivation? And most of you will probably say, because I have to, or because I want to get into a good college, or I don't know, it's stupid, which frankly, I can kind of understand that perspective. But think about, is there a way for me to start to try to get a little bit more interested in it? I know some of the classes are boring. It'll be much more interesting when you get to college because you have more freedom about what you can take. But it might be something simple like I just want to learn some stuff. I want to gain some knowledge. It could be that I want to compete for grades. Maybe if you're a competitive person, that's kind of motivating. It could be that you want to be responsible. You want to stop being a kid and start being a young adult and take care of your business. That feels really good as a teenager to be on top of your stuff. Maybe
mhm.
you want to be dedicated or diligent. These are all values and intrinsic ways of being and applying those values to school that can kind of kickstart your motivation. So don't always look outside of yourself for a motivator. Sometimes it's best to look inside of yourself.
Dr. Heck, that's so helpful. Last week, I decided that I was going to take care of getting my will if I were to die. And that was something I absolutely did not want to do. But I realized that I'm a grown up and probably should. And so I decided I was going to treat myself to a cookout milkshake. And that was pretty much the only way that I got it done.
There you
So
go.
but I needed an external reward.
Yep. Yep. What flavor did you get?
The best one, Oreo mint. What's your favorite?
Yeah, I like the cookies and cream kind of Oreo. Yeah, that's tough to beat. So,
Can never
but yeah,
go wrong.
that's a great application of what we're talking about. And I'm not super picky about what works as long as you're not going to be hurting yourself or hurting somebody else. Whatever it takes to motivate yourself, I think go ahead and give it a try.
Yeah. And to know that as adults, we need those things too. Like, of course. Um,
Absolutely.
our next question is similar. It says, how do you continue to have motivation for school and not let your mood overcome you during this time? I find myself getting annoyed with my family for doing nothing, and then I procrastinate my work to the last minute. I don't have any motivation. There's nothing to look forward to get my work done. So I guess that's similar, but do you have anything else you
Mhm.
want to add on that?
Yeah, let me just kind of keep going a little bit with that. First of all, you're not alone. I think a lot of folks are going through this. And when stuff is bothering us, like from the continuum, it does start to ooze out into our lives in different ways. So it might be we're kind of cranky with our families and or our friends. And so, but we don't want that to happen. We want to be responsible for our mood. Okay. So we want to try to, as we grow into young adults and adults, we got to kind of be in charge of what's going on inside of us. And that's part of why it's so helpful to talk about these things. What I would say is, I like the idea of A, being aware of what you're feeling, and then B, tending to it when it pops up. And then what you want to do, so like kind of what we were talking about before, you want to pop the hood. What am I feeling? I'm really cranky that I can't go do the stuff that I really want to do. Like I'm pissed. So sit and feel pissed for 30 seconds, 60 seconds. Let it be there and then say, okay, I felt that feeling. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to kind of put it in a box and set it to the side. And I'm going to bring my attention back to what I'm focusing on in the present moment, which is my schoolwork. And if that mood kind of pops up 5 minutes later and is like, hey, we gotta feel cranky again, take the box down, open it up, let yourself feel cranky, put it away, and then get back to what you're doing.
Mm,
And what you're doing by doing this, it's a healthy compartmentalization of the mood. So it's not floating around inside of us and it feels like we can't control it. What we're doing is we're actually feeling it and giving it our full attention for a little bit. Again, it's just usually a minute or two. So it's not wallowing, but it is attending to it. And then we kind of set it to the side. And so that's a really good way to start practicing managing your mood proactively. And what it does is it'll help you to focus so that the mood isn't creeping into your schoolwork or your practices or your conversations with your family. The other thing that you could do is you could start to verbalize it, right? So I said before you can handle it internally, but you can also handle it by verbalizing with someone that you trust. So
mm.
it could be a best friend, it could be a trusted adult, it could be your parents if you have a good relationship. And I would just start by saying, I'm feeling really pissed, man. Like, like this, I'm so fed up with all of this stuff. And sometimes it is very helpful to express it verbally and have somebody receive it and validate that you're feeling that way. It feels really, really good when someone listens and understands and doesn't try to correct you or invalidate you. And you might want to start the conversation with something like, hey, man, I really need you to just listen. I don't need you to fix my problem right now. I just need someone to understand what I'm going through. And you can even say that to your parents, or your friends. And that lets them know it's not their job to try to fix it or talk you out of it. And sometimes that really, really helps because you're asking for what you need, which is a very adult thing to do.
I appreciate that. I also want to remind our students that that is a huge part of what I'm here for. And any day, every day, I'm happy to listen. So, yeah, it's great.
And take
Um,
advantage of those adults that you trust in your life, even if it's outside of mom and dad, because most adults are going to want to be helpful to you.
yeah, our small group leaders are awesome. I know students, I would just remind you that uh, you're not bothering us. Your small group leaders give up their time freely because they genuinely care about you. And I'm here, I do this because I genuinely care about you. So you're not bothering us. Often we are waiting for the invitation to be more involved in your life. So,
So, JT, we're going to run out of time here shortly, and we can certainly do another one of these at some point if people have more questions or want more information. But there's a couple of questions I did want to get to.
okay.
Let me talk briefly about I think it was the last one, which is depression and being sad.
Yeah, let's do it.
Well, let me kind of address that because that's a really, really good question. Um, so, depression is a cluster of a bunch of symptoms that occur at the same time, and they stay with you for at least a couple of weeks, and they're pretty intense. And they start to interfere in your ability to do things. And the symptoms include being sad. That's one of the main symptoms, but it can also be just feeling kind of blah. And the others include things like being really unmotivated, really not getting any pleasure out of life. Nothing feels fun. Like you kind of feel like, what's the point of even going out? It's not going to be fun anyway. A lot of times there'll be feelings of worthlessness or extreme guilt that tend to come with depression. There's a difficulty concentrating beyond what would be normal for you. So,
Mm,
like, you just can't focus. A lot of times it's because we're so wrapped up in feeling crappy that we can't really focus on anything else. A lot of times you'll see disturbances in your sleep or your appetite patterns that aren't by design or that aren't explained by other things. So, just staying up later doesn't really count. It's kind of like if you're trying to go to sleep or you can't fall asleep. That's more along the lines of what we'd be looking at. Or if all of a sudden you have this insatiable hunger and you're eating way more than you normally do, or you're not hungry at all and you lose your appetite, those would be symptoms as well. And then also just starting to feel kind of hopeless about life. And
mm.
this is a big one that you want to tune into. You start to feel like, what's the point? And then it can kind of easily drift into thinking like, why am I even here? And it can go down from there. So if you have a number of those symptoms, you don't have to have all of them, but if you have a number of those symptoms, do not hesitate to reach out to someone that you trust, ideally an adult. So your support system at church, at home, at school, in your sport. Again, adults want to be helpful. We like teenagers that approach us and have the courage to ask for help. It'd be very unusual if an adult didn't want to help you. So just kind of keep that in mind. And again, it's a little bit of a judgment call, but if you have any question about it, err on the side of reaching out.
Mhm.
Now, sadness is just a feeling,
Mm,
right? So feelings come and go. We call them transient internal experiences. Transient means temporary, and internal means you're feeling it inside of yourself. So you might feel sad for a few minutes or a few hours or maybe even a few days. If your pet died or someone in your family passed away or there's a breakup. And that by itself is normal. It's okay to feel sad from time to time. It's when it doesn't go away and then you start to get some of these other symptoms that it's kind of like a little bit of a red flag, like, hey, something's going on. I might need to talk this through or get some help.
mm.
So that's a really good way to think about the difference between the two.
That's really helpful because I know for so many of our students, there have been lots of feelings of blah, and I'm not very interested in life, but I don't really think I'm depressed, but I kind of do. And so those are
Mhm.
really helpful clarifiers. And
Yep.
I would again just remind students, if you're not sure, ask an adult, reach out to adults. Will help you find your bearings or help put you in touch with people that are professionals like yourself that can better diagnose those things.
Yeah. And even if they're just down, even if they don't think they're reaching that threshold of having these other symptoms, again, I would definitely reach out.
Yeah.
Okay. And then we've only got a couple of minutes. So can we go to the stress? Um, yeah, this one, let me go over this real quickly because we talk about stress a lot. And I think everybody in this country probably feels stress from time to time. This is a definition of it that I really like because it gives you 2 points of intervention. So the way that it's drawn on the screen here, the top line is what's called the perceived demands from the environment. And what that means is what you believe that the environment is expecting of you. So whether it's the classroom, the court or the field, the concert hall, whether it's a social relationship, it's whatever you perceive that you need to bring that people or situations are demanding of you. Okay. And so that's the top bar. The bottom bar, the bottom line is your perceived ability to meet those demands. So, the top bar on the example, it says I have 3 hours of homework that I have to do well on.
Mm,
My grade depends on it. So that's the top bar going, it's going up because you're perceiving high demands from the environment.
mhm,
Okay, now that doesn't have to be stressful if the bottom bar is really close to the top bar. And if
mm,
you're kind of like, no problem, I can do 3 hours of homework. I'm really good at that. And I usually do well on things. So if you think that way and you believe that your ability to meet the demand is right there and the distance between the two is small, then you're not going to feel stressed. However, if you think, oh my God, there's no way I can do it, I'm already exhausted, I'm not a great student, then the bottom bar is going to fall and you're going to feel a massive amount of stress. And so stress isn't a given, okay? It's not externally determined. It's how you determine it to be. That's why the word perceived is so important. It's how you see the situation, which means you have the ability to begin to change it and the way you see it. So what you can do is you can begin to lower that bar a little bit and say, well, I've got 3 hours of homework to do. I've only got 3 hours to do it. I'll do the best I can.
Mhm.
I don't have to be perfect. So you can start to drop that top bar a little bit. It doesn't mean that you give up or you don't care. It just means you're managing that perception of how well you have to do. And then the bottom bar is we got to believe in ourselves a little bit more. We've got to trust ourselves. We're tough. Human beings are tough creatures, and we forget that sometimes. So don't be afraid to challenge yourself to say, okay, I got to bring it. Let's go. Let's see what I can do. And that'll bring that bottom bar up a little bit, and you've just managed your stress a little bit. Okay, so don't take it for granted that a situation is stressful. Realize that you have some power to see it a little bit differently. It may not make a huge difference, but even a little bit of difference is going to make it a little bit easier to do what you have to do.
That's so helpful because I know that for a lot of our students, they have handed down narratives of this class is stressful or this circumstance is stressful.
Yes.
But then they experience that in really different ways. Or doing this activity is stressful. And then sometimes when your experience doesn't match with other people's, that's confusing. So this is a really helpful way to describe that.
Yeah. And what I would say is don't buy into the hype. Just wait to experience and see how it goes for you. That's exactly what JT is saying. And I think those are great words of wisdom. So,
Dr. Hack, thank you so much for your time. Thank you for your wisdom and your helpful tips. I really appreciate it.
oh, absolutely. And if anybody has any questions or you want to read more about what we do, you can go to our website, which is www.carolinastrategies.com. And so you can read a little background on us and what we do. And if we can't be helpful to you and you want some help, have your folks call us, or you guys can call us directly and we'll find somebody to get you to. Okay, I wish you all best of luck and hang in there. This is going to end at some point, hopefully soon.
Thank you so much.
Okay, good talking with you, JT.
Thanks.